So you suck at squad because you don't know where you're being shot from. Not knowing where you're being killed from is one of the most common issues and complaints that new players have with squad. And it's not really a secret why. If you're coming from a game like Battlefield or Call of Duty, there's usually a lot of visual cues to help you find where bullets are coming from. From HUD icons to really obvious tracers, those games will give you every opportunity to react to the threat before it kills you. And once you've actually located the direction of the threat, it's usually immediately obvious where the person is as well, because combat tends to take place at closer ranges. The muzzle flash is usually just as blinding as the tracers coming at you. And usually in those kind of titles, the person who's shooting at you is on the move, not deliberately hiding or holding a specific area. Even when the enemy players are making an attempt to hold an angle at longer range and kill people from further out, it's still very difficult for them to do that and remain undetected, partially because of the muzzle flash and the tracers, as I've mentioned, and partially because the maps are just smaller and you grow to get used to who's in what window and what the bushes look like, and it becomes really easy to spot targets against a plain backdrop that you're really familiar with. And even if all of that fails and you get killed in the battlefield or a COD title and you don't know where you got killed from, there's a handy little kill cam in the end that's going to tell you everything that you need to know and allow you to improve and get better because you have the information. Now, Squad isn't like that at all. This game will give you absolutely no hand-holding when it comes to determining the location of enemies. Your average optic rifleman in Squad has a weapon that is capable of one-shotting you out to around 300 to 400 meters relatively easily if an experienced player is using it. And they tend to have the camouflage and the know-how to really conceal themselves in the environment. They also don't have tracers unless they're playing as SL or machine gun. The ballistics are more realistic in Squad than these other titles, which means they're going to be able to kill you from further ranges easier due to the higher bullet velocity. And all of these things combine to mean that your average rifleman in a squad is significantly better at killing people at far ranges while remaining concealed than even your recon kit in any Battlefield title. Now, with that said, there are things in Squad that can make it quite easy to determine where you're being shot from. Potentially in some ways even easier than Battlefield or Call of Duty. You just have to get used to adapting to a different skill set, which I'm going to do my best to explain here. We're going to break this into 3 sections, starting with reacting to being shot at. Now, if you're being shot at close range, it's pretty obvious. You get hit or nearly missed, and you hear the snap of the bullet passing by you, and you also hear the guy firing in full auto relatively close to you. You can snap straight to them, and you're not really going to have any issue IDing where you're being shot from. But at longer ranges, this can become more difficult. One thing that you're going to have to account for is the speed of sound. You are going to hear the crack of the bullet passing you before you hear the report of the rifle, which actually can be quite useful because it's going to give you a clearer idea of where the report of that rifle is. This is what it sounds like to be shot at by an enemy at long range. No, it's definitely not always going to be that clear cut. You're usually going to be in a battlefield hearing all sorts of noises, and you're going to have to be able to do your best to determine the pattern between the suppression and the bullet whizzing over your head, and then the report. If an enemy is shooting at you multiple times, that's going to make it easier, but getting a feel for how long it takes a bullet to reach you is definitely going to help, and this is going to be a skill that's going to have to be worked on. One thing that can help you greatly is being able to determine what kind of a weapon is being fired just from the audio alone. Now that sounds a bit daunting and it can be very challenging in other games, but in Squad you have to remember that your faction generally has one standard rifle and the enemy faction generally has one standard rifle, and there's usually a combat going on 24/7. Generally you can just open your ears and listen, look at the map, and be able to determine that the people firing in your left ear are friendlies and the people firing in your right ear are enemies, and immediately get a feel for the gun sounds. This is why even when they change the gun sounds from patch to patch, it only takes me a couple of matches and a playtest to be able to get used to it. One thing that can be a bit challenging is you have to account for the fact that weapons sound quite different up close and far away. Not just because of the difference in volume, but also because there actually are 2 distinct different gun sounds for every gun, depending on whether it's up close or further out. Here's a demonstration of that with the M4 and AK-74. Another thing you can use is the rate of fire of the weapons. If you're playing as US versus Russia, the M4s are going to have a greatly increased rate of fire over the AK-74s, and you're going to be able to hear that immediately if people are fighting in close combat. Another way that you might be able to unfortunately determine that it's a friendly rifle and not an enemy rifle is if friendlies are shooting at you, you will not get any suppression. Here's a demonstration of being shot at by the same rifle, once on the same team and once on the enemy team. Now, all of this is really just an intro explaining these concepts. It's going to take a lot of practice to be able to use this information in-game, but you need to start looking out for it now, because this is going to be how you improve. In Battlefield games, the kill cam is going to tell you everything you did wrong and is going to allow you to determine how you need to play in the future. In Squad, if you're not observing these gunshots and trying to figure out where you're being shot from, you're just not going to develop that skill and get any better. You need to actively try to learn in Squad in order to be any better, unlike other games that will kind of teach you on the side. Now I want to move on to the second part of this video, which is holding still and actually being the shooter. One of the biggest reasons why you don't know where you're being shot from is because you're running from point to point and you are the one who is initially engaged. If you just calm down and hold still and hold a position and find yourself a good location where you're breaking your silhouette, you have a bush in front of you, and you watch a field that you think enemies are going to come through, suddenly you're going to find that they are the ones who don't know where they're being shot from. Most players you see at the end of the scoreboard who are getting massive amounts of kills are doing this. They're usually finding consistent, constant firefights, flanking off some 45 degrees and finding themselves a really nice concealed position, and then just smartly observing and engaging targets while remaining stationary themselves and not giving away their location. If you browse the countless threads on Reddit of people complaining that they don't know where they're being shot from, this is going to be the #1 reply that people get. Slow down and observe. However, you have to be extremely careful with this. I have a bad habit of going into too much detail, and I'm trying to keep this video shorter, so I'm just going to put this as bluntly and simply as I can. If you don't want to take my word for it, just go watch some of my other videos where I actually elaborate on these topics. But Squad is a very fast-paced game, and winning a game of Squad almost always relies on getting a group of people into a radius. That's basically the core gameplay. And by slowing down and kill farming, oftentimes you're going to be pretty useless to your team even if you go highly positive. So you definitely need to be careful if you take this advice, because it can potentially make you into a worse team player even if it does start getting you better games in terms of KD. It's hard to give that advice to a new player and not elaborate on when those situations are, but just do your best, use your gut judgment. If you don't feel like you're playing the objective, then try your best to get somewhere else, and always try to keep one of your eyes on the map and the game as a whole and not get too tunnel visioned on any individual action, so you can determine whether or not you think you're actually being effective to the game. And that's where part 3 comes in. Unfortunately, part 3 is a bit of an advanced topic and isn't really the best thing to be talking about in a newer guide focused at people who are just getting into Squad. But like the previous topics, it's something that you should focus on early because it's a skill that, when improved, will make you significantly better at Squad. But I'm going to keep this as simple as I possibly can for the sake of keeping this video shorter and not too overwhelming. Basically, open your map, look at your spawn point, and look at the way your squad is moving. Now mirror that for your enemies. Imagine they have a spawn point roughly the same distance away and they're moving in roughly the same direction, or rather the opposite direction, to get to you. Now start thinking about the way your team is moving and start imagining the way the enemy team is moving. The moment you start thinking about their movements and having a rough idea of where they're going to pop up in the terrain ahead of you is the moment that you're going to be able to combine the best of both of the worlds of what I just taught. Being able to react even quicker to people who are shooting at you because you already have a rough idea of where you expect to take fire from, and also being able to be the one to observe people first even while still moving because you're looking at the terrain ahead of you and you have a pretty good idea of how they're going to be moving through it. Now, once again, you're not going to be able to do this immediately, but keep this in your mind and you will improve as a player as time goes on.